Minister of External Affairs Professor Peiris says that initiatives of the Human Rights Council have disregarded the progress Sri Lanka has made in the 5 years since the end of the 30-year war.
He made this statement while addressing the high-level segment of the 25th regular session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva today.
Judging by the persistent demands made on Sri Lanka, as well as the assertion that domestic mechanisms have failed, it is clear that there is no acknowledgement of this very tangible progress. Regrettably, as much as Sri Lanka has endeavoured to cooperate with the UNHRC, there has been a series of actions, in particular the introduction of country-specific action on Sri Lanka in this council, that have shown lack of sensitivity in dealing with delicate situations and expose the unfair and biased manner in which issues pertaining to Sri Lanka have been addressed. Government of Sri Lanka categorically rejects the High Commissioner's report emanating from Resolution 22/1, which is in contravention of GA Resolution 60/251, as well as Council Resolutions 5/1 and 5/2 that guide the work and method of engagement of the Council. Sri Lanka will share its observations on the substantive content of the report. Mr. Chairman, for purposes of record, we wish to state that the High Commissioner's report has exceeded its mandate by making reference to and recommendations on numerous issues extraneous to the resolution. The recommendations contained in the report are arbitrary, intrusive, and of a political nature, and are not placed within the ambit of the LLRC, as demonstrated by the call to establish an international inquiry mechanism. Further, this recommendation is in contravention of a mandate granted by GA Resolution 48/141. In the government's detailed comments on the report, it is also regretted that the High Commissioner has raised concerns regarding a range of issues based on information of questionable veracity and conclusions arrived at in a selective and arbitrary manner. The references made in the Council welcoming the High Commissioner's report on Sri Lanka, even at the highest level of the UN, are regrettable, particularly considering that it is based on questionable and baseless material, including what has been processed outside the UN framework. The government of Sri Lanka reiterates its rejection of Resolution 22/1, as well as the High Commissioner's report in its entirety, which are fundamentally flawed. These initiatives disregard the substantial progress made by the government during the 5 years which have elapsed since the end of the 30-year war against terrorism.
At the high-level segment held yesterday, the U.S. Secretary for Civilian Protection, Democracy and Human Rights, Sarah Sewall, commented on Sri Lanka.
In 2012, and again this year, the Council urged the government of Sri Lanka to launch an independent investigation into the death of thousands of civilians during that country's terrible civil war. To date, the government has refused. Accordingly, the United States has introduced a resolution this year calling upon the Office of the High Commissioner to conduct an investigation into past abuses and to examine more recent attacks on journalists, human rights defenders, and religious minorities.
Here in Sri Lanka, speaking to the BBC World Service, Cabinet spokesperson Minister Keheliya Rambukwella categorically rejected the draft resolution on Sri Lanka, what has been circulated in Geneva. Noting that only a few years have passed since the LLRC report was released, Minister Rambukwella had said that it was completely unfair for the Human Rights Council to hold an investigation on Sri Lanka. He added that the draft resolution violated the principles of the United Nations. The United States draft resolution on Sri Lanka, backed by the UK, Montenegro, Mauritius and Macedonia, was circulated at the UN Human Rights Council on Monday. The resolution will be discussed at an unofficial meeting scheduled for Friday. Meanwhile, an 18-page report compiled by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillai, is to be presented to the Human Rights Council on the 26th of this month. The report primarily calls for an international mechanism to look into alleged human rights violations during the final stages of the conflict.